warm welcome to all our viewers from rural and regional New South Wales, watching from the many RSL clubs, of course, right across the state. And we hope you can stay with us right through this morning's broadcast.
We've got a bit of a hold-up here at the moment, I think, where the taxis can't find a parking area, I think. But nevertheless, that won't upset our pipes and drummers. But Scott, we're just coming up to the flags at the back.
Well, having just heard that stirring music there, John, of the Scots College pipes and drums, we can see, or you will see on the high shot in a moment, all those Australian flags. Over 300 national flags are there, carried by Australian Air Force cadets in full uniform. Now, a decision was made some years ago that a mass flag contingent should lead off the march every year. So the flag's been displayed wherever Australian troops have been deployed, of course, and today it takes on a special significance as we remember those who have served in the defence of Australia for more than 100 years, and also involved youth club members from the New South Wales RSL and also from across the Tasman, from the New Zealand RSA. Now they're over here in Australia as part of an exchange program. So welcome to them and thank you for participating.
And as a matter of fact, Scott, you mentioned the New Zealand RSA. Their president actually was with the wreath layers at the cenotaph this morning. He combined with John Haynes, the president of the New South Wales branch of the RSL, and they laid a combined wreath together. Another example of our special contact with New Zealand.
John, you might see a lot of people with flags in their hands, waving the flags, and also was out of the cab. It was the Australia Post going round on their bicycles this morning, giving away these flags.
The postie.
The postie was giving the flags. It was good to see them doing it. It was a great way to start the day.
Yeah, well, we saw Elizabeth Street early, riddled with postie bikes, with postmen on board just handing out the flag. A very, very good gesture, I think, and part of the real tradition, part of the spirit of Anzac Day.
And don't the crowds actually get so much better view here in Elizabeth Street with being able to be on the edge of Hyde Park and with a wider footpath here on Elizabeth Street than on George Street.
Tony, we've now got the lights coming in from the east from Hyde Park there, whereas in recent years the old route George Street buildings have been demolished. They're now steel and concrete skyscrapers, and it's a canyon. And this is very, very nice indeed. But there, a magnificent view of this superb pipes and drum combination from the Scots College at Bellevue Hill. We will have other school pipes and drums. I'm thinking of Knox College in particular later in the ceremony. We've got PLC from Croydon, relatively recent participants in the march, but they do a lovely job and will be pleased to coming through a little later on.
And John, not just Sydney bands, pipes and drums bands, but they come from regional New South Wales as well. I see on the list the Marching Koalas, which is a band from Newcastle way.
And in fact, it's very interesting when we get to those bands. Our pipes and drums and our brass bands are the traditional. A lot of the new marching bands, and the Koalas are one of them, of course. Modern instrumentation, modern uniforms. One of them I refer to the Harry Potter group. They're all backs but a pace similar to the traditional American marching bands. But they seem to be popular here, and they certainly add to our march. How is that for a vision? You couldn't get better. The Scots College pipes and drums, and behind them the massed flags, 300 of them, as Scott mentioned a little earlier. Just listen to those pipes and drums. Not everyone likes them, but my own regiment with pipes and drums, I think they're pretty good.
And I'd be right in saying that all their practice would be out of normal school hours as well, too, John. So it's quite a commitment for these pipes and drums.
A very big commitment, and it's very serious at the Scots College. You don't get into this group here marching in the Anzac Day March unless you are.
And a number of them are wearing their medals of ancestors as well, which is a nice touch.
It's a lovely sight.
It's an extraordinary sight. And as we were saying before, being carried by the Australian Air Force cadets in full uniform, as well as some youth club members from the New South Wales RSL and our brothers and sisters from across the sea, the Tasman Sea. The New Zealand RSA is also represented there in the carrying of the flag.
the crowds are continuing to stream in there, Scott. You can see people joining the edge of the march all the way along.
And talking about the crowd, some very enthusiastic supporters there sit right beside they'll stay there for the whole duration of the march. Might be 12:30, might be 1 o'clock. We'll just wait and see.
And they probably were with you this morning at dawn in Martin Place.
Many of them indeed there. Many of them regular attenders. And it was marvellous. The crowd spread right from George Street, right past the Tenor, long up the eastern slopes toward Macquarie Street, with big double screen there so people could see what was happening intimately at the Cenotaph.
And John, I was asking you before about how has this tradition carried on, particularly after the landmark centenary. And we saw there the future, literally marching, carrying tradition, carrying the past, with those young people with the flags.
Very good. And here is more tradition. How many Australians realise that the New South Wales Mounted Police is the oldest such police unit in the world? And it is. In our very colonial days, in fact, there's a book about to be published by the late, or not the late Deputy Commissioner of Police, Dick Adams, who was a service in Vietnam as well. And it's led today by Acting Inspector Kylie Riddell. She's the unit commander there. She's riding the horse Raz. Now, there are many horses, have all got names, and her Raz is just one of them. We'll speak about more later on. But a magnificent link with our colonial past.
Coming into screen now is the escort band today, is the Royal Australian Navy Band Sydney, under the musical direction of Lieutenant Brian O'Kane. On shot now is the drum major, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Hobson. The RAN band performs at a range of events, including ship departures and arrivals home, to and from deployments, graduation parades, international tattoos, concert tours to areas of operations, parades and marches.
And Tony, the RAN band, was the band featured at the dawn service in Martin Place this morning.
And I thought their vocalist rendition was fantastic. The march today is also being led by His Excellency General the Honourable David Hurley. David Hurley is a former senior officer in the Australian Army and the 38th and current Governor of New South Wales. His career culminated with his appointment as the Chief of Defence Force on the 4th of July 2011.
And I suspect we will have His Excellency leaving his position here later in the march and marching past with one of his units. We'll try and pick him out as he came.
And this is a volunteer group of veterans here, the RSL Corps of Guardians, and this has been set up by the RSL to uphold the Anzac spirit within the community. Now, as you can see, they're dressed in ceremonial uniforms. The black Akubra hat you will see some of them wearing. There's a maroon three-quarter length jacket and the black trousers as well.
On the screen now, Scott, we've got the memorial horses. Memorial horses commemorate veterans from the Boer War and World War I, and there on the screen you'll see the Mounted Police groom Alan Dudley with horse Royal and the troop horse Gallant with Sergeant James Fox.
And just ahead of the escort band, which very briefly on shot, we had the three senior officers for the Defence Force who we missed calling. Rear Admiral Stuart Mayer, Major General Gus McLaughlin and Air Vice Marshal Gavin Turnbull, who passed through very quickly off shot.
Well, unable to immediately identify that band, but looking at them, I suspect it's the band of the Sydney Cadets.
The World War I unit flags are carried by the Australian Army Cadets, John, and they have all volunteered their time to honour the memory of all Australians who served overseas during the First World War, and of course the 60,000 men and boys who never returned home. And
if you notice, Scott, they're very, very colourful banners. They all carry the traditional colour patch from the operating units of the 1st AOF. And the colour patch, in fact, was a distinguishing factor of all our Australian services.
Now, behind them, John, is the New Zealand contingent. It wouldn't be Anzac Day without our friends from across the ditch, our Kiwi friends, one half of the most famous legend. It's led today by Group Captain Nick Osborne, who served for 20 years in the Royal New Zealand Air Force before joining the RAAF in 2002. Following Nick in a wheelchair is 91-year-old veteran Ken Frank. Ken is blind and served in Bougainville. and Guadalcanal. Also marching is Miss Billy Maud, the New Zealand Consul General, and Mr John Brogden, the former New South Wales Opposition Leader. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Gillies, the Army Attaché New Zealand High Commissioner, and also Detective Inspector Bruce Shadbolt of the New Zealand Police.
Bob, I've got one message for the New Zealanders. Would they please leave the Bledisloe Cup here before they go home to New Zealand?
Oh, no chance here, John.
And here is the band of the New South Wales Police Force, one of our very, very popular concert bands, much in demand for not only our public appearances, but for special renditions of concerts and so on. A well-recognitioned, a very good quality band, and they are in fact leading the New South Wales Police contingent, which in turn is led by Superintendent John Duncan. Now he's the commander of the Ryde Local Area Command, and his service was part of the United Nations team in East Timor investigating war crimes. Now you'll see amongst the units here, the police, there's some blue berets. There's a sky blue beret worn by police officers who've been deployed on United Nations peacekeeping operation, Cyprus, Solomon Islands, East Timor. And in fact, Police Sergeant Ian Ward was killed by a landmine in 1974 while serving in Cyprus. And immediately behind that, of course, the New South Wales Police sub-branch of the RSL. Mini taxis. This year, open-top Land Rovers are no longer available for the march, so it's the New South Wales Taxi Council to the rescue.
And on view now, John, we have Navy veterans coming through from World War II, led by Rear Admiral Guy Griffiths, who saw operational service in 3 wars. Admiral Griffiths was an 18-year-old midshipman when the Repulse was sunk off Malaya in 1941, and then served on Sydney and Anzac in Korea. Many of these men have served in Korea. They've served in Far East Asia Strategic Reserve as well. But we're now on to one of your bands, Woolooware.
Yeah, Woolooware, a regular performer here. Great to see them from the Shire up here taking part in the Anzac Day March.
Of course, many of the veterans of the RAN, a lot of people don't realise Australian sailors served right across the world. We had young sailors on secondment and officers to the Royal Navy serving on Arctic convoys. They served in the Mediterranean, in Indian Ocean. A lot were taken prisoner at Sunda off Perth and ended up on the Burma Railway in the South Pacific, in submarines, in aircraft carriers, in every theatre the RAN served between 1939 and 1945. And in fact, at the end of the war, the Royal Australian Navy was actually the 4th largest navy in the world, after the USN, the Royal Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy. And
Tony, there's an equivalent thing, of course. The Royal Australian Air Force at the end of the war was the 4th biggest air force in the world.
That's true. And we're just coming up now, we've got the HMAS Australia Association, led by Commodore Peter DeShano, who's the son of Captain Emile DeShano, who was killed during a kamikaze attack on Australia in 1944. Australia was a heavy cruiser, the pride of the Australian ship. Just behind you can see Shropshire, which was her sister ship. She served at the Atlantic Sea, Coral Sea, Savo Island, Guadalcanal and Leyte Gulf. And she had 5 further kamikaze attacks in January 1945. And in both attacks there were significant casualties on board. Australia fought more actions and steamed more miles than any other Australian ship during the Second World War. And behind her, Shropshire Canberra. HMAS Canberra was Australia's sister ship. She was sunk at the Battle of Savo Island. And the British government gifted HMAS Shropshire to Australia to replace her. And many of the men from Canberra went on to Shropshire. And of course, marching with the Canberra Association today will be members of the 2nd Canberra, the FFG7, supporting their predecessors. And there's a veteran there in a wheelchair, and his carer or his son possibly is also a former serviceman.
And Tony, the link through now as we came into the commentary position this morning at the harbour to see the Canberra there at Garden Island, the New Canberra.
The New Canberra, lovely ship. HMAS Quickbase, Q-class frigate. 2 Q-class frigates were manned by Australia during the war, and a further 3 transferred to Australia post-war. And they were serving right up until, I think, Queenborough in 1971 was the last of them to go. They were workhorses of the Australian squadron during the 50s, 60s and 7. And there's a sister ship, HMAS Quiberon. Quiberon was one of the 2 that operated with Australia during the war, and that's possibly Neil Emery at the front there, leading them. In 1942, she sank a Italian submarine, Desi, off Tunisia. The merchant ships, landing ships, led today by George Hinton, who was ex-HMAS Canimbla. And of course, the HMAS Canimbla and Manora of Australia were again renamed and were ships of the 70s, the 80s and the 90s. They were passenger liners on the Australian trade, converted in wartime, initially as armed merchant cruisers and later as landing ships, and they supported the Australian and troop landings right up through the Southwest Pacific and the Philippines and later Gulf, and the proud tradition continues.
And there in the blue coats from the west of Sydney, the Parramatta City Band. Of course, a city in its own right, a city established virtually at the same time as this city of Sydney. And of course, the Parramatta City Band, regular participants at our Anzac Day marches.
Association led by Bill Allen, who went to sea as a 17-year-old and served on Glenelg. 56 corvettes were built at shipyards right around Australia, using places never built ships before, manned by Australians. Most were owned by the Australian Navy, but they were all operated by Australians. 4 were built for the Indians. A number of them were lost during the war: Armidale, Geelong and Wallaroo. And HMAS Warrnambool was sunk post-war while sweeping mines in the Barrier Reef, with a loss of a number of lives. These were manned by the end of the war. They were manned almost entirely by reservists, all men who had been called up during the war and learnt their trade at war. And we've got coming into view there HMAS Arunta. Arunta was a tribal class destroyer, and she had the honour of sinking a Japanese submarine, RO-33 from memory, very early in her career, not long after she'd been launched. And of course, it then went on to serve post-war for quite a number of years.
Tony, we're seeing an increasing number of our veterans in wheelchairs. Not surprising, but they're obviously very keen to be involved in the march.
And Tony, before with the Corvettes Association, as we see HMAS Bataan there, the Corvettes Association, former members of the Fair Miles Association, have also been marching. That association was wound up a few years ago. Fair Miles, as Tony was saying, were built around the harbour in shipyards that didn't exist before. There is very little memory or remains of it. There is Fairmile Cove still up near the Breakfast Point housing development. If you're at Breakfast Point on Parramatta River, look out on that water and honour those who built the Fair Miles.
In fact, I think it's still called Fairmile Park.
And of course,
and Fairmile Cove as well, that scalloped inlet there.
And many of them were built at Halverson's. And here we have the Dems Gunners. The Dems Gunners were mainly naval reservists who were called up immediately at the outbreak of war. And some of them were actually at sea within 2 or 3 weeks of war. They'd put a gun on the back of a merchant ship. They'd throw on a permanent Navy guy as a gun layer, and 3 or 4 young blokes as his assistants. And some of them sailed off and didn't get back to Australia waters for 2 or 3 years.
And these boats were built incredibly quickly, weren't they? We're talking a matter of weeks from the moment of construction beginning to when they're built.
The Fairmiles, yes.
And there are still 1 or 2 of them on the harbour being converted to pleasure luxury yachts, but they're about.
Coming back to the Dems Gunners, again they served all over the world. Now, Arctic Convoy veterans are the men who served on convoys up to the top of Russia. Very, very dangerous work. They were severe weather, they were very close to the German coastline, and if they were sunk, life expectancy in the water was a matter of minutes. And we're now moving into the Army contingent. Bob, over to you.
The first band we have here is from the dancers, or the Lancers at Parramatta, the first 15th. It's good to see their band has been reformed. Though they're armoured corps, they still wear their slouch hats.
Yes, so there we can pick out the Parramatta Lancers, the first 15th badge on there. I remember, Bob, going back a long time when the Lancers band appeared on this march wearing magnificent powder blue jackets. They looked superb, regimental colours.
Yes.
But apparently it hadn't been approved and none of them have been seen since. But they looked great.
And they sound good. It's a very big band too, which is very good to see. The First Armoured Regiment, first formed in 1885 as an infantry light horse regiment. This unit has 31 battle honours stretching back to the Boer War and Gallipoli. It's interesting that they were originally as an infantry unit. They weren't armoured at all. Now we have the 2nd, 4th Armoured Regiment. This unit pioneered the use of tanks in the jungle, using Matilda tanks, and were heavily engaged in the actions in New Guinea campaign and in Bougainville. Now after that we have the anti-aircraft, the 52nd. As you can see from the battle honours, where they were mainly in the Pacific, and again they would have been would had 3.7-inch heavy anti-aircraft guns to keep the enemy bombers as high away from the targets as possible. We have the 53rd Composite, which would be light and heavy anti-aircraft regiment, which was light anti-aircraft guns, which would be Bofors, and the heavies would be 3.7-inch. The Germans used their heavy anti-aircraft weapons as an anti-tank weapon very successfully, though we didn't seem to have the same
well, the principle
success.
The Germans woke up to it, of course, is the muzzle velocity was such, it was ideal for an anti-armour gun.
Right, now we have the 53rd Composite Anti-Aircraft Regiment, led today by Karen Powers. This unit saw action in New Guinea and Buna and took part in the Borneo campaign from May 1945. Now we have a 67th Mobile Searchlight Battery. Again, they provided the illuminations so the anti-aircraft guns could find the bomber targets or the fighter targets which were coming over. Of course, with these anti-aircraft guns, they had a bit of a downside, because gravity being what you throw up in the air will come down. So that's why we had bomb shelters. Not only to say protect you from the bombs, but also from these rather large shells that go up in the air and have to come back to Earth.
I can just hear some pipes in the background. There they are, and I think, looking at them, the Southern Cross pipes and drums. And they'll be seeing them at least once during our march today. And we must thank all the bands who participate. In fact, in the march today we have 66 individual bands, but some of those are going around twice and 3 times. So if there's any band organisations out there want to participate, please go and see the March Committee of the RSL.
Now we have the 2nd 1st Artillery Survey Regiment. The only veteran marching today is Gunner Doug Hansford, who was the youngest member of the regiment originally. This unit was formed in 1940 and served in the Middle East for 2 years before being sent to New Guinea and Borneo. The survey, again, so you know where your rounds were going to fall, you had to survey where the guns actually were. So if you didn't know where you were, you couldn't guarantee you'd put the rounds where they were required. Follow them, we have the Australian Water Transport Unit, which is a good...
Of course, Bob, the Australian had, up until even our time of serving, we had quite effective water transports within the Army organisation.
Was. Today it's led by Seth Weeks, President of the Association. This was the Army's Navy. It consisted of shallow draft of small ships and landing craft which could access areas the larger Navy ships couldn't reach. They ferried troops, evacuated wounded and delivered food and ammunition, and took part in amphibious landings. They took part in the Tobruk ferry runs, but also they did very sterling work in New Guinea, where the depth of water was very shallow and they could only use these shallow drafted vessels to go and resupply. Now we have to start coming into the infantry by the look of it. It's the Australian Railway Company. These units were provided to.
Well, they operated particularly in the Middle East, you recall, Bob.
The Middle East.
Syria, Palestine, North Africa.
And they also, to say, didn't mind leaving their symbols everywhere. And in Palestine, they carved the rising sun symbol into stone on every bridge on the Haifa to Tripoli railway line. But again, the best way to transport lots of ammunition and equipment and food was by the railway. So these people were ones who went
and many
by the railway.
And many of them were railway workers who joined up from the railways and found themselves on the railways during the war.
Yeah. Now we come to the SIGs, the 2 Australian Corps SIGs. His motto is swift and sure, and of course the SIGs motto is, and they are responsible for providing communications throughout the army by any means possible, by telephone, wireless, or dispatch rider, motorcycle, even pigeons. So this was the 2 Australian Corps Signals Unit. As you can see, they mainly served to the north of Australia, in the islands.
And Bob, as we watch the march continue, if we can just flag ahead, please stay tuned to ABC TV, because there are a number of programs scheduled that will commemorate Anzac Day. Immediately following this broadcast at 12:30 p.m, we'll be crossing live to Turkey for the Gallipoli dawn service, and that will be followed at 1:30 p.m. by a live telecast of the dawn service from Villers-Bretonneux in France. So our national coverage continues throughout the day on ABC News, including the news channel.
Now we have the New Guinea Volunteer Reserves and also ANGO, which was the administrative unit who administered the New Guinea during the war. And there were people like Bert Kinzel, who was part of ANGO, who supplied all the native carriers who went and carried forward all the supplies to the Australian troops who were fighting in New Guinea.
And ironically, Bert Kinzel was in an internment camp in the First World War because his father was German.
Yes. But what success we had there was mainly for his benefit of his organisation. We have the band, John.
Yeah, this is one of the most active youth bands in the city. It's the Riverwood Squadron of the Australian Air League. Regularly travel overseas and in fact won some awards at some band competitions in Asia in recent times. Big expanding numbers in their local area. Riverwood out on the East Hills line. And I remember commentating some years ago, and they had the youngest drum major I'd ever seen. I reckon he was about 4 years old, but he was wielding the mace very well indeed.
The mace was, I think, taller than he was.
It was a lot taller, Roberts.
That's probably him spinning it now.
Yes. And we're back to the gentlemen of the Royal Regiment Australian Artillery, the 14th Field Regiment. As you can see, they were the only gunners who actually took their 25-pounders up on the Kokoda Trail. They were manhandled, they were broken into packs and actually manhandled up on the Imita Ridge. But they didn't get much further than that because it was such a terrible. Also, they served at Milne Bay at one of the wonderful battles, as to say, which was won with the help of the 2 RAAF squadrons. It was the first time the Japanese actually had been defeated, and without the 2 RAF squadrons there, I don't know if the army would have won that battle. But they were definite. It was the definite first time the Japanese had been beaten. I read of pilots said it was like flying over there, was like taking off, for those in Sydney would realise this, taking off from the Sydney Showground and starting to strafe Darlinghurst and bomb Darlinghurst. Now, the airfield was that close to the front line.
Bob, some of them were taking off undercarriage up with guns firing. That's how close it was.
And in fact, I have no doubt in my own mind, if we hadn't succeeded at Milne Bay, we'd have been incapable of holding the Kokoda track.
Gentlemen, in light of that, why isn't the term Milne Bay as well known to contemporary Australians as Kokoda, as Gallipoli, given its significance?
I think a lot of it, Scott, was that MacArthur had virtually a blackout in Australia on the reporting of any offence, any activity where the Americans didn't come out of it looking good. So if it was an American defeat, it was broadcast as an Allied defeat. If it was an Australian advance, it was broadcast as an Allied advance. And really, Milne Bay, the success of the Australians was heavily suppressed by MacArthur.
Well, I think there's another story there too, is that the code breakers found out about the Japanese plans in advance on Milne Bay and on the Coral Sea. and it was in there. They were trying to take Port Moresby. So when it was kept secret because we didn't want the Japanese to know we knew about it. So a lot of the publicity around other events would have been there, but not in this particular case.
Yeah, 2 months before the actual battle, the code has been broken, and MacArthur knew that they were going to bring round the Japanese Navy trying to take Moresby, and that's when the battle of Coral Sea, and when that went down, they tried to take Milne Bay to stop the supply of American ships coming into Australia. Now we start having the AIF, the Paratroopers. Paratroopers, unfortunately, were one of the most highly trained, but they never actually jumped. In fact, the only time they were used is, I think it was when the Japanese surrendered Singapore. They provided the guard of honour, but they were all volunteers, highly trained for jumping out of a perfectly good aeroplane. But they never had a battle honour, I don't think. And now behind them is one of the units that you don't hear much about, the Central Bureau Intelligence.
Well, I've got a Sky, Robert. Just look at the banner holders there. School cadets.
From
what badge do they wear? My old school. Well done.
But in fact, the Central Bureau, they were intelligence gatherers, SIGINT, and they were set up in 42, and they were the only Australian troops that MacArthur took with him when he went to the Philippines, because they were providing him with such accurate SIGINT, and the information helped him. The rest of the Australian Army was sent off to Borneo, really to backwaters, and it was the only unit he took with him.
Bob, this banner, the Central Intelligence Corps, that's a fascinating story.
It is. It's a story in itself, and again, it's a bit like the Enigma. It was never. You didn't find out about Enigma until 30, 40 years after the war had finished. Again, a lot of what this unit did was secret and has never been spoken about, and probably never will be.
And in fact, they had their derivation from Sydney University Regiment. All of them were academics and very senior students at Sydney University and performing in the regiment. At the outbreak of war, they went into these code-breaking operations.
Now we start coming into the AASC, which Australian Army Services Corps. These were the units who went and either drove trucks or ducks, and they provided the transport which brought forward the ammunition, the food, and also the troops to the forward battle area. As you can see, they've got 3 in a row there, 107. The various companies, they drove everything from Land Rovers to 3 to 5 ton trucks. Sounds like someone's making a noise there. Might be the Army helicopters, is it?
Sounds like a helicopter.
Yes. But anyway, as you can say, the Australian Air Maintenance Company, we pioneered to a large extent the use of airdropping in New Guinea to supply, because they could not build a road up the Kokoda track.
Yeah, my old squadron, 36 Squadron, carried out those biscuit bomber drops.
It was the only way they could go and resupply.
And of course, Bob, it was a very innovative move for resupplying troops in the field at the time.
Now we have the field ambulances. These are mobile medical units that treated wounded soldiers very close to the front line. Following them are RAMI, the 2nd, 3rd Field Workshops. These were, as John called it one year, the NRMA of the Australian Army. They provided the repair of all the transport and anything, wireless sets, transport, guns, trucks. They were the NRMA.
And it is still a reasonable way of describing their responsibility, Bob. Certainly much wider than that, but it gives an inkling of what they're all about.
And the other thing about the Transport Corps was many of the men in the Transport Corps were called overage men. They were men who were deemed too old to serve in the infantry. So their ranks have thinned out much more rapidly than the infantry battalions.
And I have a suspicion we're going to have problems in the future in World War II. Our transport could be fixed by a driver with a pair of pliers and a bit of wire. Not going to happen in the future.
Now we have the AWARS, the Australian Women's Army Service. Betty Lindsay is pushed in a wheelchair by her son Ian. She is 101 this year. Happy birthday to her. Betty served in the World War II in signals, and the AWAR banner has been carried by her grandson Philip.
It's a lovely sight, Bob. It looks like several generations of that family there together.
Yes, you can see I'll say granddaughters.
I'd say great-granddaughters.
Granddaughters.
They seem to be very excited too.
Yes. And it'd be a great moment for her too, to have her grandchildren and great-grandchildren as she goes along Elizabeth Street. It's a wonderful family sight.
And not only that, we're again seeing the crowds along the street lining there. They are increasing and they're still very enthusiastic. I would suspect, I haven't seen this, is this the Australian Army Band Sydney? I would think, looking at them there, they do have the hat band of the band corps of the Australian Army. They're listed there as being band number 10, exactly right. This, with a battery of the Royal Australian Regiment, is in fact the oldest regiment, oldest unit in the Australian Army.
It traces its English lineage back to 1872, and its musical director is Major Matt Chilmay. Now we go to the 6th Division, the 39ers as they were called, because they were all enlisted in 1939 and are the first ones to go. Following them, again, the gentlemen of the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery, the 2nd Field Regiment. This is a Victorian regiment which served in Libya, Greece and New Guinea. They were most famous for their stand at Thermopylae in Greece, where one troop of guns held up the German advance for days. Each of the AIF divisions each had its own name, and the 6th Division was known as the 39ers because that's when they joined. The 7th was the Silent 7th, the 8th was the Unlucky 8th because it went into POW camp, and the 9th Division was known as the Magnificent 9th for all its various activities, particularly in Trebuk and at El Alamein.
And we have more examples there of our veterans all wanting to march but quite incapable of completing a march like this under their own steam, but plenty of assistance there.
Now we come to the infantry battalions of the 6th Division. So we start off as the 1st Infantry Battalion. It's part of 6th Brigade, and today it's led by Doug Carlton, wearing his Greek medal. He was entered to the battalion for efforts in the battle in Crete. It was all the 6th Division battalions took part in the initial activities where they took capture of Bardia, Trebuk in the early days.
Bob, we obviously have a lot of family members along there today because they just wouldn't have the number of veterans still available to march.
Here we're the 2nd, which is led by Mr. Barney Moore. It's a City of Newcastle battalion, so it would be mainly marching up there today. Its battle honours including Bardia, Trebuk, and in Libya, and also to Temple George in Greece.
And of course a lot of these early battalions were formed from the local militia regiment, so many Newcastle men would have gone to the 2nd.
And the Newcastle link continues with the 2nd, 4th, Bob, with Alf Carpenter. Now Alf turned, I think that's Alf 100. There, turned 100 a few days ago. No, that's not Alf, but he turned 100 a few days ago, and he still swims. He's part of those bold people who swim all year round, although he says of himself he's now in reverse thrust.
I've been that way for some time, and I'm not 100.
We have the 2nd, 5th Battalion today. I don't think that was Fred Hall was supposed to be there. It was a part of 17th Brigade. And again, this battalion shares the distinction with 2nd, 3rd of fighting all Australia's enemies during World War II. The Italians in Libya, the Germans in Greece and Crete, the Vichy French in Syria and Lebanon, and also the Japanese in New Guinea. Oh, where 2nd, 4th comes in after the 2nd, 5th. Alf Carpenter was part of the 2nd, 4th.
And I think the pipe band there might be the Hills District pipe band. Certainly looks like it from this point of view.
And you can see the 2nd, 4th white over green was the colour patches.
Is that Alf there in the wheelchair?
Alf. Yes. So happy birthday to Alf Carpenter, 100 just a few days ago, and here he is in Sydney.
God bless him.
Then we have the 2nd 1st Machine Gun Battalion, took part in Greek and Creek campaigns, where many of its members were taken prisoners. It was reformed in 1943 and served in New Guinea and landing with the 7th Division in Borneo. Battalion's unofficial mascot was Egyptian terrier named Hori. I've written a book about it recently, Hori the War Dog, which was not the original name of the book when it was first put out. But anyway, John,
Yeah, that's the green and white of Trinity Grammar School. It's the Trinity Grammar School marching band, which also supports their cadet unit. Very nicely turned out with their pith helmets, white, green in the school colours. In fact, we will have a number of cadet bands taking part today. Some will be just drum corps, other full marching bands like the one we see there from Trinity Grammar School. Trinity, of course, located at Summer Hill in the inner west of Sydney.
I admire these bands. I can't walk and chew gum. These young men and women, they play music, they read the score in front of them all the time, keeping time while marching. I don't know how they do it.
Yes, it's certainly a skill to be admired.
And the pith helmets look very good, don't
yes.
they?
Now we have the 7th Division, the silent 7th.
Now, the 7th will be led by Dick Payton, formerly of 7th Div Signals. There he is. There's Dick, and beside him,
It's
a descendant of
the Fuzzy
Wuzzy Angels.
Miss Alice Tamor, New Guinea National, representing the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels of the Kokoda Track.
In fact, while Alice is staying here in Sydney, she's staying with Dick's sister in the house next door.
Oh. Carrying the flag today is World War II descendant Boyd Trefedick. Dick served in Middle East, New Guinea and Borneo. Now we're gone to the 25th Brigade. And again, from you can see, they were actually formed in England and went back to the Middle East. Now you start and come to the gunners, the 2nd 5th, 2nd 6th. The 2nd 5th, in fact, was the Roden Cutler's Regiment, who was the Roden Cutler was the former governor of New South Wales, who was awarded the Victoria Cross while fighting the French in Syria.
And that old chap there on screen's got a military medal, middle of screen now, in a blue jacket.
He is not able to identify him, but if I had a military medal, I'd be very proud, very pleased to be able to wear it. Bit of a a bit of a stop here in our march at the moment. Not unusual in a march like this. There are reasons we can't see on our screen where there is hold-ups and the marchers just have to remain. But it gives us an opportunity to perhaps look down this street, take advantage of the people lining the street. There we are, the ornamental poppy specially bought to support Anzac Day. And there we have 2nd 5th
That
Field
was the
Regiment.
Roden Cutler's Regiment, who fought in Syria as a part of the when the Australian 7th Division invaded Syria, and in fact finished up in Damascus and cities which are now unfortunately in war conditions again today. I can't tell which unit this is. Unfortunately, the banner is... thank you.
There we are, 2nd 6th.
Another lot of gunners, led by Fred Smith, an original unit of the 7th Division. Again, it saw service in Egypt, Palestine, Syria, New Guinea and Borneo. It fired almost 200,000 rounds in action during the war. And it had a very fine reputation. So Frank Berryman said it was one of the best gunner units he'd ever seen.
And Arthur Blackman, VC, who won his VC in the First World War, commanded one of the field regiments or the machine gun regiments in Syria, and later was captured at the fall of Singapore.
Now we have the engineers of the 7th Division and their special pioneer companies. These are the engineers who did all the hard backbreaking work of road building, digging ditches, digging command posts. Again, so the infantry are here again. We have the 18th Brigade. 2nd 9th, 2nd 10th and 2nd 12th. Brigade of... In fact, this is an unusual brigade. It was at Tobruk. Normally, Tobruk is... it's only spoken about 9th Division was there. The 9th Division had 3 brigades there. and this brigade, the 18th Brigade, was actually put under command of the 9th because it needed 4 brigades to go and hold the Tobruk perimeter. And so this brigade was part of the siege of Tobruk. And also, strange enough, it was the AIF Brigade was at Milne Bay. So this brigade, in fact, took part in 2 of the most significant battles from an Australian's point of view in the Second World War, where the first one we stopped the Germans' blitzkrieg for the first time, and then we stopped the Japanese invasion for the first time, and forced the Japanese to go and withdraw.
The Tobruk example has another particular significance, Bob, commanded and the whole defence planned by Australians.
Yes,
General Morshead.
We now have the second 25th again. If you can see their battle honours where they've been, again it was in the Middle East and back over to the Guinea. Again, the second 31st, a member of that brigade. It's its first campaign was in Syria, where Private James Gordon was awarded the Victoria Cross. After returning, they fought in Kokoda and Gona and participated in the Battle of Leh. They finished up the war at Balikpapan in 1945.